each week of the many shirim on YouTube. We remind those of you who, whether you're here in person today and you watch some of the shirim on YouTube afterwards, or whether you're just joining us via YouTube, we remind you please to make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which gives us a lot more traction and helps us in terms of the algorithm and statistics. So that's an important detail to please be aware of. And also one last public service announcement to please make sure our cell phones are on silent or on vibrate or off completely. There are some extra copies of the source sheet here in the front. If anyone did not take the source sheet at the table on the way in, there are some source sheets here. And as I mentioned earlier, we're already in the zone to look ahead and prepare for Purim. Again, tomorrow evening begins Rosh Chodesh Adar, which means we're really in the zone to look at and prepare for Purim. And so this morning, I want to take a deep dive and take a look in detail at one of the most beloved customs associated with Purim. That's the custom to dress up and put on a disguise on Purim just to keep Bob happy. I'm going to put the hat on. And of course, we're all familiar with this custom. And I know in households where there are children in the house, I can just tell you my daughter has been planning her Purim costume for the past 6 weeks. And so what is it about disguising ourselves that we're meant to accomplish on Purim? What's the reason why we masquerade on Purim? Now, of course, the most obvious and most familiar answer to that question is the fact that the story itself is called Megillat Esther, which literally means the scroll of Esther, but can also mean what? To reveal that which is hidden. And therefore, the entire story is about revealing secrets and hidden messages. So that's one idea. Of course, another idea is the fact that Hashem's name does not appear in the Megillah, and therefore there's a hidden hero, if you will, a hidden protagonist calling the shots behind the scenes, and that, of course, is a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And then lastly, and perhaps most simply, is the fact that Esther herself conceals her identity, right? When she ascends the throne, it's not known that she is of Jewish heritage, and she conceals her identity. So those are the three most common answers for why we have this custom of dressing up, of masquerading on Purim. But we're going to see together this morning that there's actually a much deeper message behind our Purim masquerade, and it begins actually in next week's Sedra. If you take a look at text number 1 on our sheets, in next week's Sedra, Parshat Tetzaveh, we're introduced in great detail to the various Bigdei Kahuna, the various garments that the Kohen and the Kohanim would wear in the Beis HaMikdash, and the materials that are used to make those garments, whether it be gold, whether it be argaman, whether it be techelet. And then, if you jump ahead to text 2 on our sheets, the very beginning of Megillat Esther, how does the story of Megillat Esther begin? Well, no, not the exact word. What's going on? What's the opening scene of Megillat Esther? Of the party, the Mishnah, the Suda. Achashverosh is making this grand Mishnah, this grand Suda. And what happens at that Suda? He comes wearing and showing off the splendors of his kingdom. So wait a minute. Who is Achashverosh? Achashverosh actually was not really the royal. Achashverosh married into royalty. Who's really the royalty? Vashti. Vashti, of course, is the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. And therefore, not only did Achashverosh ascend the throne by marrying Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter Vashti, but he also inherited the various spoils of war that Nebuchadnezzar had gathered over his great triumphs in his period of leadership of Babylonia. And of course, amongst those spoils were what? The spoils of the Beis HaMikdash. And if you take a look at text number 2, we're introduced that Achashverosh arrives at this banquet, and he wants to show off the splendor of his kingdom. If you take a look at the last pasuk, last from Vav. Chor karpasu tchelet achuz b'chavlemutz v'argaman. Okay, agwile chesef mudei shesh mitod zahav v'chesef. Okay, so it's the exact materials that were introduced in Parshat Tetzaveh in describing which garments, the garments of the Kohen Gadol. So seemingly, Achashverosh arrives at that banquet and he's displaying the spoils of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara Megillah, text number 3 in our sheets, tells us this explicitly. Look at the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Barotot osher kva machuto." What does that pasuk mean? Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina melamed shelavash bigdei kahuna. It teaches us that what? That he wore the bigdei kahuna. So the beginning of the whole story seems like a great desecration. Achashverosh HaRasha comes to the Suda, and the Gemara tells us that he displays all the spoils that Nebuchadnezzar had conquered and taken when he began his conquest on Yerushalayim and took over Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Achashverosh comes to that Suda showing off that who is in possession of the vessels to the Beis Hamikdash and of the garments of the Kohen Gadol? Achashverosh. And therefore, that's how the whole story begins. But that's not the only time we see those begadim in the Megillah. What happens later on in the story when it's found out that Mordechai had actually spoiled a plot to assassinate and harm the king? What happens? Mordechai is paraded at the suggestion of Haman. Mordechai is paraded through the streets on the royal horse, wearing the royal garments. Okay? If you take a look at text number 4 in our sheets, Mordechai yatsa b'lifnei HaMelech, b'levush machutz, and which royal garments? Tchelet v'chor v'ateret zahav, dolav tachri butz v'agaman. It's the same garments that Achashverosh wore to the Suda, meaning Mordechai is paraded through the streets wearing what garments? The bigdei kahuna. And at face value, this seems like a beautiful, beautiful tikkun. Okay, Achashverosh HaRasha comes to the Suda, and he's wearing the spoils of the Beis Hamikdash. And then later on in the story, when the story begins to turn on its heels, the Gadol Ador Mordechai, the great tzaddik, is paraded through the streets wearing the bigdei kahuna. Except there's one very big problem with that. At face value, it's a great tikkun, but what's the big problem? Mordechai is not a Kohen. Mordechai is Ishimini. The Megillah tells us he's Ishimini. He's from the tribe of Binyamin. So how could it be that Mordechai, the Gadol Ador, the great tzaddik, allows himself to be paraded through the streets wearing the bigdei kahuna? That's also a problem. But we're going to come back to that question, okay? Let's take a look. Let's move on. We know the famous Medrash, okay? The famous Medrash. Rabbi said, please let's check our phones. Okay, the famous Medrash, text number 5 in Esther Rabbah. Rabbi Yudan bar Rabbi Levi b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Kol makom shenemar b'Megillah zo l'melech Achashverosh b'melech Achashverosh hakatuv medaber. Anytime in Megillah Esther that the word Hamelech is followed by the word Achashverosh, then we know we're speaking specifically about the king Achashverosh. Okay, v'chol makom shenemar l'melech stam, and anytime the word Hamelech is not followed by the name of Achashverosh, mishamesh kosh v'chol. It means that what? There's a possibility of a double entendre. That the word makom not only is a reference to the king of Persia, Achashverosh, but who's the ultimate makom? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So anytime the word Hamelech appears in the Megillah and it's not followed by the name Achashverosh, says the Medrash and the Medrash Rabbah, there's a double entendre that's being introduced. And it's not only a reference to Achashverosh, but perhaps it's also a reference to the Melech Malchei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why is that important? So take a look at text number 6. Text number 6. Vayomer Hamelech le'Esther, Gam bayom hashani b'mishteh hayayin. Ma she'elatech Esther malka v'tinatan lach, u'ma bakashatech ad chatzi ha'machu v'teyas. So who's the Melech here? It could be that it's simply a conversation that she's having with Achashverosh. But if we accept our medrash, which suggests what? That there's a double entendre being communicated, then who's giving Esther the confidence that she should feel comfortable standing up and asking and speaking out on behalf of the Jewish people? HaMelech. It doesn't say Melech HaChashverosh. HaMelech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is instilling within Esther that confidence. This is Esther's moment where she rises to the challenge. Don't forget, in the beginning of the story, she's reluctant to speak up and reveal her identity. So much so that Mordechai says that if she doesn't, then Revach Latzal Lamal Yehudi Mimakam Acher, that salvation will come for the Jewish people from another place. But at this point, Esther finally has the confidence. The Kadosh Baruch Hu instills within her the confidence. So why is that important? Why is that important? We know, if you take a look at text number 7, in the Tikkunei Zohar, we learn this very, very famous teaching. Purim it's kriyat al shem Yom HaKippurim. Purim, it gets its name, or its name is similar to Yom Kippurim. That in the future, Yom Kippur will be like, Yom Kippur is a Yom Kippurim. In the future, Yom Kippur will be a day like Purim. And it'll be transformed to a day of what? Celebration and enjoyment. So what does that mean? So says the Rabbi of Rishon, and get ready for this, because it's going to kind of turn our minds in circles. Says Rabbi Yisrael of Rishon that if Yom Kippur is called a Yom Kippurim, he says, Kata Nitla Bagadol. It means that the lesser day is being compared to the greater day. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. It means that Yom Kippur, which we tend to relate to as what? As the most important date in the Jewish calendar, says the Rebbe of Rishon, no. Yom Kippur is a Yom Kippurim. And it must mean that what? Kata Nitla Bagadol. If it's being compared to Purim, that means that what? That Purim is even greater and more important than Yom Kippur. So what exactly does that mean? We're going to come back to that question in just a few moments. So we mentioned already so far that there are two moments in the Megillah where we see the appearance of the Big Day Kahuna. And we mentioned also that Purim is somehow connected or related to what? To Yom Kippur, and maybe even greater than Yom Kippur. So where else do we see those Big Day Kahuna appear in the Megillah? Take a look at text number 8. Vayhi b'yom hashlishi, and it came on the third day before Esther is about to go and meet with the king and Haman at the Seudah. Vatilbash Esther machut, and Esther put on what? The royal garments. Vata'amo b'chatzar beit hamelech hapnimit nochach beit hamelech. That Esther went to stand outside the outer chamber, okay, of the palace of the king. Okay, and in order that what? She should plea to the king. But in both instances, the word Hamelech is not followed by what? Achashverosh. And she's wearing the Vatilbash Esther Malchut. She's wearing those same royal garments. This is Esther Amalka's Yom Kippur moment. Okay, Purim is Yom Kippur. We just discussed this, right? This is Esther Amalka's Yom Kippur moment. What happens on Yom Kippur? What happens when the Kohen Gadol puts on those begadim on Yom Kippur? He goes to the Kodesh HaKadoshim in order to what? To plead before the king, the Melech Malchei Amlachim, to have compassion, Rachmanut, on Am Yisrael. And Esther Amalka has finally, even though in the beginning of the story, she's reluctant to reveal her identity. She's reluctant to speak out. She's reluctant to try to save the Jewish people. At this moment, what? It's her Yom Kippur moment. She rises to the occasion. She puts on those Big Day Kahuna. It's her proverbial Yom Kippur. She's ready to go plead, not before Achashverosh. Who's she pleading to? The Melech. She's pleading to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Moshe Wolfson, Zecher Tzaddik Kadosh Livracha. It's not on your sheets, because I saw this yesterday morning after we already prepared the source sheet. Rabbi Moshe Wolfson says about this pasuk we just learned. V'ta'amod b'chatzar beit hamelech hapnimit nochach beit hamelech. Listen to Rabbi Wolfson's beautiful words. U'betargam nochach beit hamelech nochach Yerushalayim. The Targum on this pasuk says that where did she go to stand? Nochach doesn't mean just in front of the Beis Hamikdash, the palace of Achashverosh. It means she stood facing towards Yerushalayim. She imagined, she envisioned, just like we're meant to do when we daven, she envisioned herself at that moment as if she was standing in the Chatzar of the Beis Hamikdash. Ki bevadai Chatzar Beit HaMelech HaPnimit hi Chatzar Beit HaMikdash. That certainly means that what? Because it doesn't. The word HaMelech is not followed by Achashverosh, so it certainly means the palace of the king. And what's the Chatzar, the palace of the king? The Beis Hamikdash. Okay. And now he says the following. Ki HaMelech hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The king is Hashem. The Eich Amda Sham Halo Hi B'Shushan. So how do we understand this? He says, how can we say she's standing in the Chatzar of the Beis Hamikdash when we know she's where? She's in Shushan. Okay. So he answers, Umefarish HaTargum Shekavana Pnuya B'Tfilah Nochach Yerushalayim Kevin Hamid Palel. It means that what? She had kavana, that she's davening towards Yerushalayim, just like all of us, no matter where we are in the world, when we daven and we face Yerushalayim, Mir Kodesh. V'im machshavata hayta be'ota hamakom, harehi mamash omedet be'ota hamakom, ki yadua me'abal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And he says, Rabbi Wolfson quotes the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and that, who says that if a person really has kavana like we're meant to when we daven, what? And we really feel like we're facing and turning towards Yerushalayim, then it's considered as if what? We're actually in the Beis Hamikdash. If a person has the kavanah like we're meant to have, then it's considered as if we're actually davening in the Beis Hamikdash, says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. Now, listen to this idea just to review what Rabbi Wolfson is saying so beautifully. This is Esther Amalka's Yom Kippur moment. She dons those big day kahuna, just like Mordechai, okay? And she goes to plead her case before the Rebbeinu Shalom. She davens like the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur on behalf of the salvation of the Jewish people. And she stands in deep, deep concentration and contemplative thought. And it's as if she's transported where? To the Beis HaMikdash itself. So there's only one problem with this. It's a beautiful idea, just like we said about Mordechai. What's the problem? Never mind, she's not there. How could it be that Esther wears these garments that seemingly are inappropriate for her? How could it be? How could it be permissible? And we're going to come back to that question. Now we're going to come back to our sheets now. We're going to take a look at text number 9. Again, I want to focus a little bit more to understand this better on the connection between Purim and Yom Kippur. And we're going to be introduced to a beautiful idea that Rabbi Avram Shor, in his Sefer Lakach V'Alivuv, text number 9 on our sheets, brings in the name of the Rebbe of Komorna. Okay, and this is what he says. The Ra'iti b'Sefer Kedushat Aaron, shemevi b'shem Rebbe HaKadosh Komorna Zchuto Yagin Aleinu, Davar Nifla. He says, there's a beautiful, wondrous idea that the Komorna Rebbe brings, okay? In Yamashe b'Purim, Mishanim HaMavushim. Why on Purim? What? We dress up in disguise. We change our garments. Why we put on clothing that we otherwise wouldn't wear, right? Uminag Yisrael Mekora B'Shor B'Kedusha. And every custom of the Jewish people finds its source in something sacred. So listen to this idea. Umevoar ki Yom Kippurim huzman echad mifayes el chaveiro. What happens on Yom Kippur? What happens Erev Yom Kippur? Everyone's running around and we say to our friends, do you mochel me? Are you mochel me? Will you mochel me? Okay, Yom Kippur is all about what? Forgiving one another. Okay, and Purim is related to Yom Kippur, and we said earlier, even greater than Yom Kippur. So now listen to this beautiful idea. Okay, v'yesh anashim ke'ela asher kasha lefasim. He said, but there are people that what? It's difficult for us to forgive. Sometimes there are people that our relationships are so challenging with that person that it's difficult for us to either look them in the eye and ask for forgiveness or to look someone else in the eye and to forgive them. Okay? Because we have, all of us, the nature of human beings, and what? Sadly, we often, all too often, hold grudges. and we keep accountings with one another. And it's not always so easy for us to what? To put that aside and request and give forgiveness to one another. Aval bevo yom Purim, but when Purim comes, asher koach hamechila b'yom hazeh gadol me'od ad shamru chazal, where the power of forgiveness is so great on this day of Purim, in accordance with our Chazal teach us. Okay, al yom kippurim shu kippurim. Okay, it's greater even than what? It's above. It's beyond Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is called a day like Purim. Therefore, Purim is the greater day. And what's the essential message of Purim? It's unity, Jewish unity. We give tzedakah to those who are in need. We give our friends shalach manos, our neighbors shalach manos. All about what? Building achdus, building unity. And that's why on Purim we have this custom of changing our clothes, of disguising ourselves. Okay, why? And put a mask on our faces. Why? In order that people in those circumstances, in order to what? Enable anyone who finds themselves in those circumstances where we have an ongoing grudge with someone, and it's been difficult for us to make amends with them, either to ask for their forgiveness or for us to forgive them. I'll take this a step further. Many of us are also crippled by our own guilt. Many of us have a very hard time looking ourselves in the mirror and forgiving ourselves for mistakes that we've made. And says the Rabbi, the Commander Rabbi, this beautiful idea that when we put on those garments, we disguise ourselves, we put the mask on our face on Purim, it allows us to look one another in the eye and forgive one another, and it allows us to look ourselves in the mirror and begin to forgive ourselves. Because this is the work that we're meant to do during these days of Adar. Liknot amidah shel ayin tova, liot ba'achdut amiti echad im hasheni. To what? To dedicate ourselves to this idea of having a good eye, of seeing the good in one another, and developing true unity amongst Klal Yisrael. Putting on our costumes, says the Commander Rebbe, is a very, very sacred idea. It's not just revelry, it's not just fun, and not just part of the simcha of Purim, but rather it is connected to this idea that Purim is even greater than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day of forgiveness, and therefore, if that's true, and Purim is greater than Yom Kippur, that means that the capacity for forgiveness, innate and inherent in this day of Purim, is even greater than Yom Kippur. And therefore, if there were individuals that we were not able to forgive, or that we were not able to ask for forgiveness on Yom Kippur, we now have that opportunity through putting on our disguises on Purim to not take ourselves so seriously and be able to look one another in the eye and ask forgiveness and forgive one another, and to be able, we'll take questions at the end, and to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and begin to forgive ourselves as well. What a beautiful, powerful idea. We'll take questions at the end because there's a lot more to accomplish here. Okay. So that, having said all that, we're still left with the question. It's a beautiful idea. We're still left with the question of how could it be that both Mordechai and Esther allow themselves to wear the Big Day Kahuna. We now have a little bit of an inkling that it's somehow connected both through the Esther story as well as this beautiful piece we just learned, that's somehow connected to the energy, the dual energy of and synergy between Purim and Yom Kippur. But how can it be that these two great righteous individuals allow themselves to wear clothing that otherwise would be completely prohibited and inappropriate for them to wear? So the answer to this, says the Me'orei Einayim, another great Hasidic master, the Rabbi of Chernobyl, is if we look throughout Jewish history and the history of the Tanakh, we could probably come up with multiple examples where there are individuals who disguised themselves and engaged in what appear as at face value as acts of terrible deception, when in reality, what happened as a result of those people wearing those disguises? Yeshuot and brachot came into the world. And the two examples that the Rebbe of Chernobyl gives are two examples which appear on our sheets, Numbers 10 and 11. Okay? The first example, of course, is the story of Yaakov Avinu being convinced, Yaakov Avinu being convinced by his mother, Rivka Imenu, to deceive his father Yitzchak, to disguise himself and put on clothing and other accoutrements that would allow him to appear as his brother Esav before his father, his elderly father, who's come out on his deathbed and going blind, okay, to allow to himself to appear to his elderly, blinded father as what? As his brother Esav. And there's so many questions that could classically be asked on the story. How could Rivka do this? How could Rivka favor one son over another? But if says the Rebbe of Chernobyl, going with this whole idea, sometimes we have to step out of our comfort zone and allow ourselves to put on clothing that otherwise would not be appropriate for us in order to enable brachot and yeshuot to descend upon Klal Yisrael. Okay, by Yaakov donning this disguise, he allows himself what? To receive the brachot instead of Esav, which ultimately is what? For the good of all of Klal Yisrael, for all eternity. And so too was another example. The next example that the Rebbe of Chernobyl cites is a famous story of Yehuda and Tamar. Okay, Yehuda doesn't want to allow his daughter-in-law Tamar to marry his third son in order that she should be able to fulfill the principle of yibum, of a levirate marriage, because the first two sons that she married did not produce, they both died before producing children, and therefore he refuses to allow Tamar to marry the third son. And what ends up happening? She disguises herself, okay, as a harlot. And at face value, it seems like a terrible act of deception. But ultimately, it's what enables the bloodline of her late husband to continue. The brachot of children come into the world, of a next generation of the Jewish people come into the world through that act. So says the Rebbe of Chernobyl that we learn from these two examples, as well as from the examples of Mordechai and Esther in Megillat Esther, of what do we learn? A very important principle. That sometimes in our history, there are moments where it's important for us to step out of our comfort zone, to don clothing that we otherwise wouldn't be comfortable wearing in order to what? To bring Yeshua, salvation, and blessing to the Jewish people and into the world. And therefore, now we can understand how it is that Mordechai and Esther allow themselves to wear those big kahuna, explains the Rebbe of Chernobyl. No, I just explained it outside, okay? In order that what? Those blessings in Yeshua and salvation should come to the Jewish people. Okay. We're now going to go to text number 12. Because there's another example of disguise, not related to the Big Day Kahuna, that appears in the Megillah itself. And this is text number 12. Vayomer Charvona, Echad min hasarisim lifnei hamelech. Charvona, one of the chamberlains who served before what? The Melech. Once again, doesn't say Melech Achashverosh. Okay. Gam hine ha'etz asher asa Haman leMordechai. He says, who is it that reminds the king that Haman had prepared a gallows to hang Mordechai upon? It's Charvona appears. Who is Charvona? Charvona was one of the servants, one of the chamberlains of the king. Seemingly that king means what? Achashverosh. But again, his name does not appear afterwards, which means that this pasuk has a double entendre. So why is that important? In the Shoshanas Yaakov piyut that we recite following the reading of Megillat Esther that Rabbi Adler is going to speak about in next week's Yom Yud in greater detail. In Shoshana Yaakov, there's a famous verse that we all know because it became a popular song. Okay, what's that verse? V'gam charvona zachor l'tov. That also charvona is remembered for good. And where is that expression, zachor l'tov? Why is that expression familiar to us? Who else is referred to as being zachor l'tov, as being remembered for the good? Who else? No one? Eliyahu Navi. Very good. Take a look, okay, at text number 14. Ma'asa Eliyahu. This is the Medrash and Esther Rabbah. Ma'asa Eliyahu zachor l'tov. What did Eliyahu, who's remembered for good, do? Okay, nidme lecharvona. He disguised himself and appeared as who? Charvona. Amar lo Adonai Amelech. Gam hine ha'etz asher asa man leMordechai v'gomer. Eliyahu Navi appears, inserts himself in the story. Eliyahu Navi appears disguised as Charvona. No one recognized him as being Eliyahu Navi. It's Eliyahu Navi who's the harbinger of salvation for the Jewish people, who appears disguised as Charvona. And he's the one who says to the Melech, double entendre, to Hashem, because he's the Shaliach of Hashem, as well as to Achashverosh. Wait a minute, don't you remember? Haman HaRasha built a gallows to hang Mordechai upon. Why don't we hang Haman on that gallows? And says the Rebbe of Amshinav in text number 15 on our sheets, Itav Medrash Esther Rabbah, we learn in the Medrash and Esther Rabbah, Shecharvona hu Eliyahu Navi, v'nidma lahem the Charvona, that Charvona is Eliyahu Navi, and he appears before them disguised like Charvona. Yechol lefaresh, debe'emet Charvona haya nefesh gavoa, rak nitgalgel l'makom haklipot. We can learn from this what? That Charvona must have been what? A lofty soul, the neshama of Eliyahu Navi being mitgagel to the realm of klipot, of impurity. And he says, we learned this, okay, in the Sefer HaTanya. The Baal Tanya describes the fa'amim nolad eitzel ama aretz neshama gavoa. That often, throughout history, an ordinary person is born with what? A very, very lofty soul. Okay, this is the idea of Gilgul Nefashot, that sometimes the Shamot have to come back into this world, and sometimes there are lofty souls that interject themselves in periods of Jewish history by being reincarnated in order that they should be in the position to what? To be the catalyst for salvation. Okay, v'charvona zeshiyah echad min hasarisim hamashartim apenei hamelech. Okay, and Charvona was one of those servants who served as a chamberlain before the Melech, the king. Shor haya okay, misharet et penei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. It means what? That in his essence, who was his soul meant to serve? Who did he personify in his service? Who did he really come into existence to serve? Not the king Achashverosh, but who? The Melech Malchei Hamlachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu. The Im King, if that's true, Pa'al Eliyahu Navi Sheyamar Eitza Zeh Litlot Et Haman Ubezet Tapach Latov V'Naaseh Charvona Zachor Latov. And if that's true, okay, then what does it mean? Now we can understand how Charvona inserts itself in the middle of the story. Okay, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this chamberlain of the king. Okay, and he's the one who reminds everyone what? Haman wanted to kill Mordechai. Let's use that same gallows to hang Haman. Okay, he didn't just come out of nowhere. He was none other than Eliyahu Navi, appearing in disguise in order to enable the Yeshuos to come to the Jewish people. There's one last idea that I want to bring now, and just to bring this all together, which is connected not only to this idea of the masquerade, but more importantly to this idea of the parallel, the connection between Purim and Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur as being a day that's likened to Purim, meaning that Purim is even greater and beyond Yom Kippur. And the capacity for forgiveness and kapara and atonement, therefore, is greater even on this day of Purim than what we experience on Yom Kippur. So if you take a look at text number 16 on our sheets, this is the Megillah and Parak Chet. Va'atem kitfu al Yudin katov v'nechem b'shem hamelech. And you should write as you wish to the Jews in the name of whom? The Melech. It doesn't say the Melech Achashverosh, right? It says it's a double entendre. Write as you wish, as you will, to the Jews in the name of the Melech, which is the double entendre, meaning possibly both Achashverosh and Hashem. V'chitmu b'tabat HaMelech, and should be sealed with the insignia of the ring of the Melech. Okay, not Melech Achashverosh, but the Melech. Ki katav asher nichtav b'shem HaMelech v'nachtom b'tabat HaMelech ein la'ashiv, because once it's been written, something's been written at the hand of the Melech and sealed at the hand of the Melech, it can't be overturned. Now, wait a minute. This pasuk, the word HaMelech appears 3 times in this pasuk, and it's not followed even once by the name Achashverosh, which means that therefore we could read what? That if something has already been sealed, written and sealed with the signature and the insignia of the Melech, meaning Hashem, ein la'ashiv. You can't what? You can't change that decree. Now, Purim, again, is likened to what? Yom Kippur. And in Yom Kippur, we believe, okay, we say, B'Rosh Hashanah yikatevu. On Rosh Hashanah, it's written, U'b'Yom Tzom Kippur yichatemu. And on what? And on the day of the fast day of Yom Kippur, the sacred day of Yom Kippur, it's sealed. We have a period of 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur where Hashem, the Melech, writes the decree. And then on Yom Kippur, the completion of those 10 days, the Melech seals the decree. And if we understand this pasuk in Megillah Esther, okay, that it doesn't follow the name Achashverosh, doesn't follow the name of Melech, then therefore what might we learn? That once it's sealed on Yom Kippur, okay, whatever that decree is, seemingly there's what? There's no going back. But is that true? We have a Shor Rabbi. What else do we have? What else do we have? What else do we have? Some of us learned together about Zor Chanukah a few weeks ago. And we learned about that there's a minhag to say Tashlich on Zor Chanukah. There are many periods throughout the year, calendar year. By the way, if you look and be perplexed, you can find that shiur on YouTube. It's called Tashlich and Tevet, and you'll hear that idea. There are many periods, seemingly, throughout our calendar year where we can work towards overcoming that decree. But most specifically, there's one day. And what is that day? Take a look at text 17, the beautiful teaching from the Slonim Rabbi, the Nesiv Shalom. Nesiv Shalom, of course, was a great Hasidic master who died in the year 2000. So he's a pretty contemporary Hasidic master. He was a Nitzal HaShoah who, together with his father-in-law, the Birkas Avram of Slonim, survived the Shoah. The Slonim Hasidut was devastated, was decimated by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam Zichram, and the Birkas Avram, together with his son-in-law, the Nesiv Shalom, came to Eretz Yisrael with just a handful of Hasidim that survived the war, and they began to rebuild the Slonim Hasidus in Mea Shearim, and you can still go to visit the yeshiva there. The Nesiv Shalom begins his career here in Eretz Yisrael as the Rosh Yeshiva of the Slonim Yeshiva Mea Shearim. When his father-in-law, the Birkas Avram, dies in 1981, he becomes the Slonim Rebbe, and he becomes one of the most famous and most beloved Hasidic masters of the 20th century. His Sfarim, known as Netivot Shalom or Nesiv Shalom, are found in virtually every Beit Midrash in the world. They are amongst the most powerful, beautiful, and easily accessible in terms of their Hebrew, Sfarim, Sifrei Chassidut in the world. And we're now going to learn just a short, beautiful snippet from the Nesiva Shalom in text number 17. And this is what he says. Nimsa ki Purim hu hayom hayachid b'shana bo yachol Yehudi l'shanot et kol hagzerot afilu ma shebebechinat nechtam b'tabat hamelech. What do we learn? That there's one day a year, one time a year, where all the gezerot can be overturned, where we have the capacity to overturn all the gezerot, even those that have already been categorized as being what? Sealed with the insignia of the king, of Hashem himself. Ubezeh miyuchad Purim mikol moadim shabbatot tovim she'em bahem giloi zeh. And therefore, what? Purim is greater than any of the other holidays, Shabbos, anything in the Jewish calendar, because they don't possess this capacity of overturning the Gezerah. Ukidichtiv hayomer hamelech le'ester b'mishneh hayayin mash elateich v'inaten lach u'ma bakashateich batayas. The pasuk we learned in the beginning of this year. Okay, and when the verse says that the king promises Esther anything you ask for, at the mishneh hayayin. What's that a reference to? Mishneh hayayin. Where else do we have a mishneh with yayin? The Sudas Purim. The story of Purim begins with a Mishnah, the Suda. Esther that hosts two different Sudot, Mishnah Yayin, with Achashverosh and Haman. And ultimately, one of the reasons why the halacha is why we have to drink wine at the Purim Suda is that wine becomes, this Suda, this Mishnah Yayin becomes the catalyst for what? For the salvation of the Jewish people. And therefore, there's one day a year, okay, where we have a Mishnah Yayin, where we have a celebration with wine, where the king is invited, so to speak, to that celebration. The Melech, not just Achashverosh. The Melech is invited to that Mishnah Yayin. One day a year at the Sudas Purim, when we have that Mishnah Yayin, the Melech is invited. And the Melech therefore promises us what? Anything you ask for at that Mishnah Yayin will be given to you. HaMelech hu malcho she'olam. The Melech is the king of the universe. Omer la Yehudi olech chashichim v'shiru behesterim, who says to the Jew who is walking in darkness and stuck in hiddenness, Ma she'elatech v'yinaten lach ma bakashatech v'teyas. Anything you ask for will be given to you, and anything you request shall be yours. The Mishnah Hayayin, on the day of the Mishnah Hayayin, of the Purim Suda, Heincha yachol lif'ol kol mashalotayich bakashotayich. Okay, on this day of Purim, when we're sitting at the Purim Suda, where we're engaging in that Mishnah Hayayin, anything we ask for, the king is there with us. Anything we ask for, the king is ready to grant. Even those things that have already been sealed on Yom Kippur. Okay, Yom Kippur is a day, Kippurim, it's like Purim. Says the Rabbi of Rishon as we began. Yom Kippur, therefore, is a day that's lesser than Purim. Purim is even greater than Yom Kippur. Therefore, if something has already been decreed and signed and sealed on Yom Kippur, seemingly that decree is already signed, sealed, and delivered, except there's one day a year where we can undo that decree. And there's one experience each year that allows us to plead our case before the Melech and be given the opportunity to overturn those decrees. And that one experience is the Mishnah Yayin, the Sudas Purim, when we're dressed in our disguises, when we're drinking l'chaims, when we're together with our family and with our neighbors building achdus. All these beautiful ideas where we have the capacity to forgive one another, to look each other in the face and forgive those for whom we've had conflict that we've been struggling to forgive. And most importantly, perhaps, to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and be able to let go of the guilt that all too often cripples us and leaves us stunned like deer in headlights, unable to move forward, unable to have the confidence to ask Hashem for that which we need, unable to have the confidence to speak out on behalf of others in Sarah. But just as Esther Amalka had her Yom Kippur moments, and she appeals to the Ribono Shel Olam, the Melech Malchei Amlachim, the ultimate Melech at the Mishteh Hayayin, one day a year, the Melech comes to our Mishteh Hayayin. The king comes to our wine banquet. One day a year, the king is there with us as we don our disguises, our costumes, and we have the opportunity to plead our case with confidence and knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the ultimate Rachaman, who has unending love and compassion for every single member of Klal Yisrael, that Hashem gives us the day of Purim, where it has the capacity to even overturn those decrees that were signed, sealed, and delivered on Yom Kippur itself. My friends, as we prepare for Rosh Chodesh Adar tomorrow evening and the awesome days ahead, I'll leave you with one last idea from the Rabbi of Rishon. The Rabbi of Rishon asked the question, the famous Mishnah, Misha Nichnas Adar Marbi Mesimcha. When Adar begins, from Rosh Chodesh Adar, we're already supposed to increase our joy. And he points to the first Mishnah in Masachet Megillah, talks about what days of the week we are allowed to read the Megillah. Now, let's say I live in a small village and I don't have a professional Balkoreh, or I don't have my own Megillah scroll. So on the days that we come into the bigger cities to do commerce, even if it's already the 11th of Adar, or the 12th of Adar, or the 13th of Adar, even if it's not Purim itself, I'm allowed to have the Megillah read for me on those days. It's called Yemei HaKnisa, the days that we come in to the bigger cities to do commerce. So says the Rabbi of Rishon, if Yom Kippur, has 10 days to prepare for, and Purim is even greater than Yom Kippur, then Purim needs even more time than Yom Kippur to prepare for. And therefore, if the Megillah can be read already on the 11th, what does it mean? That we have 11 days, so to speak, from Rosh Chodesh Adar to prepare for the energy of Purim. My friends, as we get ready, to enter into the month of Adar, and we embrace all these beautiful ideas, they would be zoche, especially this year, more than ever, to prepare ourselves emotionally, spiritually, for the awesome Yom Tov of Purim, for the Yom Tov where we're going to sit at the Mishteh Hayayin, where the Melech is going to sit together with us. We're going to don our disguises so we have the confidence to forgive ourselves and let go of the guilt, to forgive one another, but most importantly is that we have the confidence to stand up and ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Melech who's there with us at our Mishteh Hayayin, at our Purim Sudas, to bring us the salvation that we so desperately, desperately need. May we be zochet to see that salvation this Purim as well.